Welcome back to another episode of Talks in Class. I am your host, Jenna. Thanks for joining me. If you're watching on video, I have just kind of made my bedroom floor my recording studio. I started recording here one day because my husband was sitting out at our desk, but this is comfy, so this has kind of become my new spot. I'm also recording this episode earlier in the week than I usually do because this week I am going home to Wisconsin to visit family. So I'll be traveling on Wednesday, and then on Thursday when I usually record the pod, I am going up to Minneapolis to see one of my friends from high school, and we're gonna go see Stassi from Vanderpump, which you guys know I love. She's doing some sort of tour for her podcast, I think. So we're gonna go to that. So this week's a little bit of an unusual one, but I will be back home in Wisconsin for about a week and a half this time. And for those of you who don't know, my mom still lives in my childhood home, and my old bedroom at my mom's house is a time capsule of the 90s and the 2000s. It's full of all of my stuff from when I was growing up, or not all of it, but a lot of my stuff from when I was growing up. And it's really where I find most of the stuff that you see in my throwback videos. I do have a brief bedroom tour up on my YouTube channel, but I always end up making a lot of content when I'm there since I am quite literally surrounded by nostalgia. So it just sparks a lot of memories. This time, one thing that I'm really looking forward to is looking through some of my old American Girl doll stuff. I was obsessed with American Girl dolls growing up. I had a lot of the stuff because the Pleasant Company, which owned American Girl doll before they were bought out by Mattel, I think, was based in Wisconsin. And they used to do this warehouse sale. I think it was once a year in the summer maybe, but we always went to it. And it was usually a group of us who would go. So it was my mom and I, and then one of my mom's friends and her daughters who were good friends of mine. And it was like this big event that we would go to, and it was so exciting. And of course, it was a warehouse sale, so it had just random stuff, as you would expect from a warehouse sale. So I would have accessories for, I don't know, Molly, even though I didn't have the Molly doll, because that's what I would find at this warehouse sale. So my Samantha doll would have, Molly's bed or something. I guess the whole historical piece of American Girl dolls was kind of lost on me, obviously, since my Victorian era doll was sleeping in a bed from the 1940s, but whatever. It was really fun. It was a very exciting event each year. So I'm going to go through that stuff, and if I find anything good, I will make a video and show you guys. But let me know if there's anything else you specifically want to see while I'm back in the time capsule. If you're watching on video, just comment or, DM me on Instagram or whatever. You guys know where to find me. As always, I will start off this discussion with my what good happened. I feel like a lot of good little things happened this week. We took our dog, Daisy, we have a 2-year-old Boston Terrier, Daisy, to a new vet this past weekend. We had to find, all new things since we moved to LA, and she did so well. She was really, really kind of excited to be there. Everybody was really nice. Daisy wasn't nervous. So that was a relief because I'm never quite sure how she's going to react. I got a lot of work done this past week despite kind of feeling a little overwhelmed lately, but I feel like I'm back in kind of a groove. And then one other thing that was just a really nice surprise is that I decided to extend my trip back to Wisconsin by a few extra days. I usually go visit my mom every couple months, but I haven't been there since December. So at the last minute, I was like, maybe I'll stay a few extra days. And I was able to change my flight and get the exact same flight time a couple days later for no extra charge, which never happens. I almost always end up changing my flight for some reason, and I always have to pay extra because obviously the flight prices go up when you get close to the travel date. But this time it was the same price, so I didn't have to pay any extra. That was such a nice little surprise. So this week, I want to continue the conversation from last week because last week I talked about Laguna Beach and how amazing and influential it was back in the mid-2000s. And we can't talk about Laguna Beach without naturally leading into a conversation about the spinoff of all spinoffs, really, which is The Hills. Before we get into the episode, I do want to give a very quick shout out to my clothing rental service, Jenna Barclay Style Box, because spring is officially here, which, I mean, I am wearing a sweater, but it is beautiful outside. Spring has sprung. So if you are looking for an easy, low commitment way to test out new styles, new colors, new cuts, or just add variety into your wardrobe, this is honestly such an easy and cost-effective way to do that. Your subscription gets you access to hundreds of clothing items from a bunch of different brands. You can rent them 2 at a time, and you can keep them as long as you want, and you can swap them as many times as you want throughout the month. There's no time limits and there's no swapping limits. You can also try it completely free. Your first month is always free. Just head to jennabarclaystylebox.com and click Get Started. That first month will automatically be free. Now go rent some fun clothes for all of your spring activities. Now let's get into our conversation. Where do I even begin talking about The Hills? It's funny to me to think that this show was technically a spinoff because it has become such an iconic cultural artifact, especially for people around my age. Because for girls like me, it defined the late 2000s. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. So much of what I remember about that time was so influenced by this show. It really defined what I thought life would look like, or should look like maybe, as a young adult. It was so glamorous to me, or at least I thought it was back then. Now, when I rewatch it, I'm like, oh my God, you could not pay me to go to a club on New Year's Eve, especially not with a man wearing a fedora. But you know, it was a different time. Back then, I really thought that working a soul-sucking PR job and, you know, spending Wednesday nights drinking overpriced vodka cranberries at Les Deux, wearing a dress with a bubble hem, was goals, like capital letters, #goals. But we live and we learn. I still have pretty clear memories of watching The Hills at my mom's house in our downstairs TV room over the summer in 2006. The show started May 2006, which was just after my freshman year of college ended. And I can still picture myself and my friend sitting on the couch down there in my mom's house in the basement TV room, watching it on our big TV. In 2006, we still had one of those big screen TVs, like the 90s, early 2000s version of, we called them big screen TVs. It was like a giant screen. And I think this was kind of the first widescreen TV that we owned. The screen was flat, but it still had that huge, big, clunky back. I mean, this thing was a piece of furniture. It had like a base on it. It was so big it had wheels. And if you sat too far to the side of it, the screen was kind of dark because of the way that the screen was. You had to sit directly in front of it. I mean, this sounds so primitive now, but these were a really big deal in like the 90s. And they were super expensive. So when we got that thing in, I don't know, the late 90s, my mom had that thing, I mean, probably for 15 years. And when I'd go home for summer during college, I would watch reruns of, you know, Desperate Housewives or whatever was on TV during the days down in the TV room on that big, giant, clunky thing. I mean, that was the TV that I remember watching everything on until I was like a full, real adult. But the fact that I remember watching The Hills so vividly, it's such a clear memory that I knew for sure that the series had to have started in the summer because I can remember watching it during the summer. Like, I remember what the air felt like sitting in the basement with the AC pumping. It was always really cold in the basement, but you know, it was kind of that hot, humid Midwestern summer. Like, I remember this so vividly, even 17 years later, which I think it just points to the influence that this show had right from the beginning. There was no period where we had to be sold on it because Laguna Beach did that. So for me, it was like, oh, there's a spinoff coming of Laguna Beach. There was no buy-in. I was already sold immediately. And I wasn't a huge LC girl. I feel like a lot of people were Lauren Conrad super fans, and I really wasn't that. So I wasn't necessarily watching it because I felt this need to know the continuation of Lauren's story. I watched it because I wanted to continue to live vicariously through this show and, you know, live vicariously within the Laguna Beach extended universe. And while I obviously loved the Orange County setting of Laguna Beach, of course, my Midwestern teenage self who had seen the ocean maybe a handful of times total in my entire life at that point was obsessed with the idea of a town like Laguna Beach. But the hills being set in LA sealed the deal for me. I was completely sold the first time I saw, the montage of random shots of street signs around LA and then the sparkling lights of Hollywood as it fades to black on the hills. I have this theory actually that certain cities and kind of just their overall vibes go through trendy cycles that correspond to fashion aesthetics, but also just what's happening in pop culture in general. Like the early to mid 2000s was very much LA, California aesthetic vibe. It was Paris Hilton, Britney Spears. It was, Y2K and surf aesthetic. It was a lot of bright colors, paparazzi, Hollywood, glamorous. Everything was bright and glamorous. Then by the late 2000s and definitely into the early 2010s, things went into a very New York City vibe. Fashion shifted, of course, to more formal aesthetics with the business casual in the club era, the girl boss era, and also we had indie sleaze. And then we had shows like Gossip Girl and Pretty Little Liars that were extremely popular. And of course, they were set on the East Coast, but they also just had this very East Coast feel to their aesthetic. And obviously, the late 2000s also had the New Jersey exploitation boom. Jersploitation? I don't know. Somebody needs to come up with a name for this. But this was that era when suddenly pop culture became completely obsessed with like stereotypical New Jersey characters, which was weird but also amazing because it gave us things like The Real Housewives of New Jersey and Jersey Shore, and then also forgotten gems like Jerseylicious. Do you guys remember that show? I think it was about a hair salon. Anyway, I came of age in the era of beach locations, sunny, bright, glamorous places. So many of the shows and movies that I loved growing up in the 2000s took place in places like this. The fashion reflected this. I think it also really informed the way that I viewed places like this, especially because I had never been there before. I'd never spent time in these places. I didn't know what they were like. So I was really only getting this information from media. So when Lauren pulled up to her new apartment at the Villas at Park La Brea in her little black convertible, a convertible, I was like, how California? And she found Heidi and Audrina sunbathing by the pool, surrounded by palm trees. This was my dream life. I was watching what I thought was my dream life on my television. Fun fact, I actually live in the same neighborhood as the apartments where Lauren and Heidi lived in the hills. On the show, they call them the Hillside Villas, I think, but they're actually the Villas at Park La Brea. They're part of the whole Park La Brea apartments. And every single time I drive past the entrance to that apartment complex, all I can picture is Lauren driving out of there with her suitcase in her car on her way to spend summer in Malibu with Jason, instead of going to Paris. And they had that dramatic build-up with all these shots of Lauren with the suitcase, Lauren driving, Lisa waiting at the airport, and building up to the reveal that Lauren went to Malibu with Jason and Whitney went to Paris. Iconic. So iconic. A lot of the places that they used to film out on the show often are gone now. R.I.P. Les Deux. But there are a few that are still around. I was actually with my friend the other day and we drove past the Dime and I was like, oh my God, the Dime, as in Stacy the bartender. So that's still around. And it's on Fairfax, by the way, if you're in LA and you feel the need to do a little nostalgic The Hills tour, you can visit the Dime. But I loved watching these people because these people in a parallel universe could have been me, right? They were the same age. They were just starting college. They had just left home for the first time to kind of go out on their own. But they were living these fabulous, glamorous lives around Los Angeles. Meanwhile, I was watching the show in my mother's basement in my small hometown after having just moved out of a dorm room that literally looked like a prison cell and smelled like Love Spell and Franzia boxed wine. And like everything else pretty much that I watched and really loved back then, what I loved most about The Hills was obviously the fashion. Objectively speaking, I really, when I look back at the years that the Hills was kind of at its height of popularity, so I would say 2006 to 2009-ish, they're some of my least favorite years for fashion. I mean, it was mostly not very good. We had skinny jeans bunched up at the ankles because we didn't really know how to shop for skinny jeans yet. They were foreign to us, and we'd pair it with ballet flats that made our feet look really big with the skinny jeans that were bunched up at the bottom. Or, maybe we'd put a weirdly puffy, like long tunic top that had that tight band of fabric at the bottom, and we put that over the skinny jeans, and the band of fabric would sit right around the widest part of our hips, and the fabric would just kind of like flop over it, and that would be our outfit. Maybe the tunic would go over cropped leggings, and we'd add a black peep toe pump with it. There's a lot of bubble hems, a lot of stacked platform heels, a lot of just plastic accessories. It was really, really 80s inspired, and looking back, it looked cheap a lot of the time. But the girls on the Hills, I don't know, they made it look so good, and I was so influenced because prior to the Hills, I would say that I was still pretty much living in the kind of peak McBling era. I was doing like a lot of Abercrombie and Hollister. I was cuffing up my bootcut jeans, which was kind of like our transition to skinny jeans, but I wasn't on board with the skinny jeans yet. I was still doing a lot of lace trim camis and like, I don't know, Hollister graphic tees. So when the Hills came out, it was like a window into more sophisticated fashion or just other ways of dressing, kind of other aesthetics. And of course, like Laguna Beach, we had options for our style icons on the Hills. If you were an LC girl, you could obviously go buy, some headbands and copy her looks. If you were preppy, you could copy Heidi's looks. Heidi was very preppy in those early seasons. She wore a lot of polo shirts, a lot of like pearls. Then there was Whitney. She had this amazing kind of effortless, cool girl style. I loved her style. I still love her style. Actually, upon a rewatch, which I do often actually, The Hills is kind of my comfort show. I just kind of put it on a loop. It's always that show that I turn on in the background. But upon a rewatch, I will say I think a lot of Whitney's outfits from The Hills could fairly easily be modernized for today, just with some tweaks. And then there were my favorites, Audrina and Stephanie. When I look at the late 2000s and kind of the evolution of late 2000s McBling aesthetic, it was really interesting because it kind of went three different directions. There were three different ways that you could take your McBling style evolution around this era. There was the really girly and cute, but also kind of glamorous kind of vibe. That was really the way that Lauren dressed. And then there was kind of a rock-inspired thing going on with a lot of distressing and studded accessories and chip black nail polish, very Audrina. Or you could go full-on boho, which Stephanie Pratt obviously leaned into a lot of the time. If you've been listening for a while, you already know that I went hard on any and all boho aesthetics, but this late 2000s boho vibe, I mean, it was probably my favorite of all time. And Stephanie was one of the girls who wore a lot of things that I wanted to copy. She did a lot of chunky beaded jewelry and like chunky knits and fringed accessories, really giant brown leather bags and belts, strappy flat sandals, forehead headbands. I mean, she did all of it. The whole aesthetic of the late 2000s that was like a coral or maybe turquoise tank top with a chunky knit cardigan over it, torn to shreds cut-off shorts, gladiator sandals, a big brown handbag with, maybe some gold studs or chains or fringe or all three on it, and an armful of all different kinds of bangles. That in my mind is still like peak fashion. I still have such a soft spot in my heart for that. And when it comes back, I don't care how old I am, I will run. I will be first in line to buy all of it. And even though the fashion on the Hills stands out in my mind as such a huge part of why I love the show and why I think it has endured as something that people remember from that time so vividly, but for some reason, maybe because The Hills was so much longer than Laguna Beach, but for some reason, I don't remember specific outfits from The Hills the way that I do from Laguna Beach. There are hardly any outfits, specific outfits actually, that really stand out in my mind. Instead, when I picture the show and I picture the different girls, I kind of have like a mood board that comes to mind. Like for Audrina, I picture extremely low, dark, True Religion jeans, giant oversized diamond stud earrings, and just a lot of black, dark colors. Whitney is a lot of flowy white dresses, tops, just a lot of white and florals. I actually do. There's one specific outfit that I still think about often, and that is the outfit that Whitney wore on the first day at Teen Vogue. It was like this cute white dress with a belt and boots, and they made her change the belt because they said her outfit looked too Western, and they said, we've kind of done the Western look, and made her change the belt. I loved that outfit though. It was so cute. I still think it's cute. And then there's Lauren. Of course, Lauren is a lot of like button-up tops and headbands and like satin fabrics, a lot of shiny outfits, and oversized moto style handbags. Look, okay, I know Balenciaga is canceled, but I would be remiss if I did not mention this because The Hills made me want a Balenciaga city bag the way that Newlyweds made me want a white multicolored monogram Louis Vuitton. I was obsessed with that bag, and still when I think back to that era, and especially when I'm talking about kind of that boho thing that I really liked, that bag is what comes to mind. If you Google Lauren Conrad Balenciaga moto bag, the girl had it in every color. Nicole Richie too. Nicole Richie actually had it in this kind of bright turquoise color. I can still picture the tabloid photo of her carrying that bag. The Olsen twins too, they were big fans. All my style icons of the era, really, they all were obsessed with this bag. So naturally, I was obsessed with this bag as well. Okay, anyway, back to The Hills. Then there was Heidi. Heidi's style really evolved over the course of the show. She had a lot of actually really cute outfits. I like a lot of her stuff when I rewatch the show. But I mean, there's a lot bigger conversation when it comes to Heidi, obviously. The entire roller coaster that was Heidi and Spencer's storyline is, I mean, that's a whole different conversation. And I have a lot of thoughts on it. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings on just Spidey in general. I mean, I don't know. I'll just say this. Whether it was intentional on Spencer's part to get airtime, which I wouldn't put it past him, or it was, a lot of editing, or he really was just crazy, or it was a combination of all of those things, that show created a villain in Spencer that I had never experienced, especially on reality television, right? We thought this was real. It was a real person. I mean, I don't think that I had ever seen anybody that the audience collectively rallied against in such an intense way before, and probably not after until, I don't know, maybe Danielle Staub on Real Housewives of New Jersey. I mean, he was such a great villain, and whoever is to blame / thank for that, whether it's Spencer himself or the editors or everybody, but I mean, I think it really took the show to a new level. And things really got so crazy for Heidi and Spencer. I think they ended up moving to, I think it was Costa Rica for a while after the show wrapped because they were so hated. And they said that they just basically wanted to run away for a while, which is kind of sad. And of course, thanks to the incredible ending of The Hills, which people have a lot of thoughts on. I thought it was kind of genius. But of course, thanks to that ending and everything that's come out since, we obviously know for sure now that The Hills was not really reality. But it's funny because people still maintain such investments in this drama, right? Like, people still hate Spencer and Heidi, especially Spencer. They even tried to revive the whole Audrina and Justin Bobby romance storyline in The Hills reboot a couple years ago, as if we didn't already know that was all fabricated for the original show. It was like, we're just supposed to forget, people still are invested in this stuff. I actually really liked the reboot. I'm sure it was mostly for nostalgia purposes that really made me like it, but I also think that I genuinely did enjoy it for the same reasons that I enjoyed Laguna Beach and The Hills the first time, and it's because, these people are my age. I was their age when The Hills started in 2006, and we were in college, and I'm still their age now as they're navigating marriage and divorces and kids and careers and all of that in their 30s. So even though they're celebrities, at least to whatever degree a reality television star is a celebrity, they still have that aspect of relatability for me, and I think a lot of people around my age, in that we are at the same kind of life phases at the same time. And I really sort of feel like I grew up with them almost. I have been watching these people on TV, or at least kind of from afar in social media and tabloids and whatever, since 2004. That is 19 years. 19 years that Lauren and Kristen and Lo have occupied at least some space in my brain. I mean, that's a really long time. And we have really been through so much in these 19 years, haven't we? So many good outfits, so many bad outfits, so many bad boyfriends, so many iconic moments. And speaking of iconic moments, I'm going to end this episode with a list, but I just have to tell you guys, I need you to know this was really, really difficult for me to narrow down, but I did it. So I present to you my top 10 favorite moments in all of The Hills. Number 10, when Heidi crashed the young Hollywood party. Okay, this should have been our first indication that the show was not real, and this was right from the beginning. I mean, this was Lauren's first assignment at Teen Vogue as an intern, and she's just gonna let Heidi and her boyfriend and whoever else was with them she's just gonna let them in. And Whitney too. Whitney didn't even fight this. No, not real. Great fabricated drama right from the get-go. Number 9, Spencer having a meltdown and using his crystals to calm himself down after another fight with Stephanie. You guys, I can still picture the scene. He has like all the crystals all over him. This was kind of the tipping point, I think, for most of us watching, where we said, okay, they've really gone off the deep end. Spidey has lost it. I mean, by this point, Heidi had really gone crazy with the plastic surgery. That was all over the tabloids. And then Spencer comes out with these crystals. And this was like, 2009 maybe? This was not mainstream, okay? This was really wacko stuff to see on your television. But you know what? Joke's on all of us, because in 2009 that might have felt crazy, but now crystals are so mainstream. I feel like everybody has crystals in their house, and Spencer still has a thriving crystal business. So, I mean, I guess good for him. Number 8, when Lauren told Audrina that she really shouldn't stress over Justin Bobby because homeboy wore combat boots to the beach. I know you don't want to call that your boyfriend. Actually, that whole scene when they're at that beach party and Justin just takes off, it's so good. And, again, looking back, watching it now, it's pretty fake, but it's still so great. And there's so many quotable lines that came out of that show. So regardless of if the drama was fake, those lines were real, okay? And I like to think at least some of those tears were real. Number 7, when Audrina accused Lauren of hooking up with Justin Bobby. I mean, this is pretty bad. There's no defending this. Watching it back, I mean, this was the final nail in the coffin of their friendship. You can't come back from this. Rewatching a lot of it, I'm usually not on Lauren's side with a lot of it, because a lot of the things that happen feel a little petty. But she was right about this. I mean, I would be offended too. And it was really funny when they get into that confrontation about it, and Lauren's like, I forget exactly what she said, but she basically is like, I would rather die than hook up with Justin Bobby. And here's Audrina, who's been like following this man around for 5 years. And Lauren's like, ew. Number 6, when Whitney tripped on the Today Show. I still can't watch this without wanting to shield my eyes. I felt so bad for her. And we all loved Whitney, right? I loved Whitney so much. She was so sweet. This moment was so genuine. You could see the horror on her face, and it cuts to Lauren and she's like, oh, it was so sad. But she handled it so well. Go Whitney. Number 5, when Heidi crashed Lauren's birthday party on the boat. The best part of this episode, arguably, is when Lauren asks where they went, and whoever she asks says they left, and Lauren looks around and says, we're on a boat. Where did they go? But really, this whole episode is amazing. It gives us another one of many Lauren and Heidi tearful fights. We get a really good drama between Heidi and Spencer because Heidi lies about where she's going to Spencer because Spencer hates Lauren. It's just like all of the drama that was happening on the hills at that moment just all happened in one episode. I'm pretty sure that's the episode when Heidi gets the phone call that Spencer is hitting on Stacy the bartender. It was just like the explosion of every single storyline, all the drama coming together at once in one episode, and it was on a boat. I mean, perfect. What more could you ask for? Number 4, oh my God, when Lauren fired Stephanie from People's Revolution and then Stephanie cried. That was actually really sad when Kelly Cutrone tells Lauren that she has to fire Stephanie. I actually felt bad for Lauren. Even now, knowing that it's fake, when I watch it, I cringe because can you imagine having to fire your friend who you convinced your boss to hire? Also, Kelly Cutrone was so heartless, but she was so fun to watch. I hope that at least some of her persona on that show was real because if not, she did an amazing job of portraying just like the scariest woman I've ever seen grace my television. Number 3, the you know what you did fight at Les Deux. This is probably the top fight that we see between Lauren and Heidi throughout all of the hills. And it's early on in the series, but it's so iconic. It's still quoted all the time. The backstory to this fight was that Lauren thinks that Heidi and Spencer are responsible for spreading the rumors about her and Jason's sex tape. They end up at Les Deux together, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody because I'm pretty sure the entire cast was at Les Deux every single night of the week. At least that's what it looked like on the show. And of course, they get into a huge screaming match over it. Number 2, when Lauren did not go to Paris. This is probably one of the most memorable storylines from the show. People still talk about this. They still call Lauren the girl who didn't go to Paris. And I think what's even more iconic than Lauren actually not going to Paris was Lisa telling her, Lauren's always going to be known as the girl who didn't go to Paris. Can you imagine your boss saying that? I would start sobbing on the floor of the office and have to quit immediately. Like, that's horrifying. And number 1, my favorite moment in all of the hills, the most important moment, I think, of the entire series, when Lo named Justin Bobby. And the reason that this has to be number 1 is because imagine if we just went through all 6 seasons of this show and a reboot of the hills just calling him Justin. How boring. Lo really created an icon in that moment. And he's still Justin Bobby to me. He will still always be Justin Bobby to me. On that note, I'm going to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation about the hills. Now you have to go rewatch it. It's on Paramount Plus, I think. It's on Hulu. There's lots of places to watch it. So I highly encourage a rewatch. It is really, really fun to revisit it if you haven't in a while. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who might also enjoy it. I always appreciate when you share the episodes with others. And please rate, review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll be back next time. Bye!